Good morning. Welcome to my thought for the day. I'm still in Luke chapter 2, thinking about the period of time between when Jesus had been born and circumcised at 8 days, and when the three wise men, the wise men, we're not sure, there is no record of there being three. We assume three because they brought three gifts, but it doesn't actually say three in Matthew's account in Matthew chapter 2. We have traditions, don't we, that colour our thinking about Christmas. But when Mary had observed the 33 days after his circumcision, which was 8 days after his birth, she and Joseph took the baby to the temple in Jerusalem to comply with the rulings of the law, which was that the firstborn child was dedicated to the Lord and had to be redeemed, and there was also sacrifices required to be made to mark the purification of Mary, to enable her to go back into society after childbirth. There were different periods of time for a male child and for a female child. The period of purification was different, but for when Jesus was born, Mary would have been secluded from everyone, really, for 40 days. It's a strange observation, but I think in some ways it's a very kind one, really, because think about the period of time in which Jesus was born. Childbirth was probably one of the most dangerous things a woman ever did or ever went through, and the possibilities of infection and complications after birth were quite large, and to be kept away from society and be able to have time to recover was a very, very wise thing, I think. But here we are. They come to Jerusalem, and it says in chapter 2, Luke chapter 2, verse 24, and to offer a sacrifice according to what is said in the law of the Lord, a pair of turtle doves and 2 young pigeons. Now this tells us, you may think, well, why do we want to look at that? Well, when you read Leviticus, particularly Leviticus 5, is a chapter which tells us the possible offerings that could be made. And the more usual offerings were things like a lamb or a ram. But then it says if financially you couldn't afford a lamb, you could bring 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons as an offering. And then if you couldn't afford 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons, you could bring an ephah of fine flour. So nobody was excluded. Even the poorest people could bring an offering to God. And the fact that Mary and Joseph brought a pair of turtle doves or 2 pigeons, we don't know which of the 2 they brought, but they brought birds rather than a lamb, shows that they did not have very much money. They were not wealthy people. And this is something to ponder over. You know, Jesus did not live a lavish lifestyle. He did not have plenty. He had everything he needed, and he lived healthily, and he fed well. As an adult, of course, he went to lots of meals with people. He was invited to all sorts of places for meals. But in his infancy and his childhood, he lived in a modest home, a home that was not wealthy enough to offer a lamb, to buy a lamb and offer a lamb. And it tells us that Jesus understands what it is not to have a lot of material wealth. And he doesn't despise the poor. He came to minister to the poor, to bring hope to the poor. He didn't come into the rich and wealthy section of society and go around giving handouts. It wasn't what he was there to do. He came to be part of his society, of his world. And the fact that Jesus understands what it is to be poor, he understands what it is to be persecuted, he understands what it is to have to flee for your life. He understands what it is to be rejected. He experienced it all. And even in his infancy, he experienced poverty, or a very simple life. I don't know what the earnings were like for a carpenter. I know that Joseph was a carpenter, and Jesus would have been taught to be a carpenter, and he would have earned a living until he began his ministry. No idea what sort of income that would involve, but we do know that he had at least, I think it's 4 brothers and sisters born after him to Mary, and so the income in his household would not have been very great. I personally think that's one of the reasons why the wise men brought gifts of gold, frankincense and myrrh, because they could be sold to finance the flight into Egypt and to enable the family to live in Egypt until they were able to come back on the death of Herod. So it's wonderfully inspiring to know that Jesus understands what it is not to have plenty and to live simply, not frugally, simply, carefully perhaps. But even though they hadn't got a lot, they gave out of their little to honour God and to thank the Lord for the safe arrival of this child, as every Jewish family would do when they came to end the period of uncleanness for the woman. That's my thinking for the day, that Jesus understands so much of our human plight. God bless you. Have a great day today. God bless you. I'll see you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.